Okay, welcome everyone. We'll have a few people continuing to trickle in, but we're going to get started with the webinar. So welcome and thanks for joining today. So this is the Connect with Nearby Nature Creating Field Guides webinar, the second in the Connect with Nearby Nature webinar series. And I'm happy to welcome you here today. This is just a half-hour webinar. So I'm looking forward to sharing tips and examples to help you and your students engage in nearby nature through the creation of field guides. And before we get started, I'd just like to take a few moments to give a land acknowledgement. I'm going to read our organizational land acknowledgement, which you can see on the screen. And I will then add a few words about where I'm presenting from today. And I also invite everyone on the call to write the territory you're joining from in the chat. So EcoSchools is a national organization aiming to support, amplify, and celebrate diverse communities across Turtle Island. To deepen and reconcile our relationships with these communities, we are currently working on acknowledging the many ways of knowing and integrating Indigenous perspectives into our programming and communication. We are committed to continually develop our personal and organizational role and responsibilities to better connect with the land, water, air, plants, and animals around us, and learn more about how we can engage, support, honor, and celebrate diverse cultures, voices, perspectives, and communities across Turtle Island. And as part of our growing network of schools and partners, we'll continue to encourage this reflection, growth, and practice with the communities we serve. And for myself, I'm a settler in Turtle Island, and I'm joining today from Ngojwanong, also known as Peterborough, Ontario. This is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, including the Ojibwa, Odawa, Potawatomi, Chippewa, Mississauga, Algonquin, and Delaware communities. This land is located on Treaty 20 or Williams Treaty, and I am grateful for the stewardship that's taken place on this land since time immemorial by the original peoples of this land and continues to take place to this day by diverse communities, despite the detrimental impacts of colonialism. And today I'm really excited to talk more about the ways we can foster greater connection to land in today's webinar. Okay, just a quick note on technical support. And just a reminder for those joining, if you are not muted now, if you could just mute yourself just so there's not background noise for the other participants today. And yeah, so you can see on the screen just our top recommendations, pretty basic, but if you are having any trouble, you can try a different browser, refreshing the page, logging in and back out, restarting your computer, and of course, checking your computer's internal audio system to ensure that it's not muted. If you continue to have any issues, please note that the webinar will be recorded and posted on our website so you can watch it at a later date. All right, so our agenda for today, since, as I mentioned, the webinar is just 30 minutes, we're going to dive right in so that we have time for questions and conversation at the end. So we're going to start with just a quick recap to remind everyone about what we talked about in the first webinar in this series, which was exploring educator opportunities to connect with nearby nature. And we'll then get right into the focus for today, which is creating field guides. I'll be walking you through the different steps and considerations for students to create field guides for their school grounds or other nearby accessible spaces in nature. So I'll provide some guidance for getting started in this work, and we'll also walk through a template that we've developed to support the creation of a field guide. We'll wrap up by talking about next steps and leaving some room, as I mentioned, for questions and discussion. And just to formally introduce myself, for those who don't know me or weren't at the last webinar, I'm Clara Luke, and I'm a program manager here at EcoSchools Canada. And I'm happy to be here today and connecting with you. All right, so just for our quick recap, we held the first webinar back in December. And since what we talked about then is relevant for today's webinar, well, we're just going to review that. So we first asked the question, why connect with nearby nature? And for those joining today who may be interested in nature connection and outdoor education, this might seem like there's an obvious answer, but to make this an accessible and useful conversation for educators and students, we focused in on 4 key reasons. One is what we mentioned, developing these resources, including field guides, maps, and signage. 2 is identifying and describing elements of an ecosystem. 3 is to build relationships to land. And the 4th is to inspire inquiry and interest in fieldwork. So just a handful of some concrete ways and reasons that you might consider creating a deeper connection with nearby nature. Then we talked about some key considerations to take before starting to connect with nearby nature. And these included choosing an outdoor space, getting permission, assessing student needs and interests, and considerations for at-home learning, of course, which is even more relevant, unfortunately, today. And next, we explored a number of ideas to inspire connection with nearby nature, such as tips for getting equipped, suggestions for documenting your project, and ideas for collaborating with the local community, and as well as ways to share your work. And then finally, we demonstrated how schools can claim points towards their EcoSchools certification by connecting with nearby nature. So we just kind of demonstrated how that you can fill in the application and, as I said, get points for the work you've done. All right, so to start off, I'd just like to point out the key resources that we've designed and developed to support you in undertaking the Connect by Nearby Nature action at your school. So the first one that you see on the screen is the educator booklet, and that's the booklet we walked through in detail during our last webinar. And for those who didn't attend, it's a great starting point for the nearby nature activities. And it includes general guidance, tips, and also links to great content created by other organizations working in this field. Then the next document is the field guide instructions and template. And that's the document that's really going to guide our conversation today. And that final screenshot where it says resources is where you'll find the resources for all of the nearby nature materials. So that's the resources section of the Connect by Nearby Nature action on the EcoSchools certification application. Okay, so just a little overview here. What is a field guide? So creating a field guide is one possible component of this Connect with Nearby Nature action. And a field guide is a book or pamphlet designed to help people identify and interact with different things in the environment. So field guides are often created to share information about a specific creature in a specific geographical area. And they may also communicate information beyond basic descriptors of appearance and habitat to help people learn more about a plant or animal and also how it relates to humans. Okay, so like all of the Connect by Nature components, creating a field guide with your class or school requires choosing an outdoor location. So as we've emphasized, this is really meant to be an accessible location. So choose one such as the school grounds, if you have school grounds, maybe a ravine, a conservation area, a local park, boulevard, garden, or backyard if the activity is going to be taking place at students' homes. And on this note, we would like to acknowledge that obviously many schools and regions are currently being impacted by COVID. So if you are teaching virtually, you can still facilitate this action with your students given the appropriate supports are in place. So just a reminder, I'm sure everyone knows, but parent and caregiver engagement is really key to a successful at-home Connect with Nearby Nature action. Obviously, responsible supervision might be required for outdoor activities in the neighborhood. And this is particularly if students will visit parks or spaces away from their immediate home. So just a reminder to plan for maximum flexibility for parent and caregiver schedules. And this might mean planning for outdoor activities that can be completed at any time in the school week. So that might be the weekend as well, and stress that the activity can be adapted to a backyard, front yard, or even a balcony garden or the closest park or outdoor space. And thinking about your project components is also key here. So determine how the field guide will integrate with the other components of the Nearby Nature action. Are the students also creating maps and signage, or will the field guide be the primary focus? If the components are going to be integrated, just be sure to review the other templates as well. And a reminder that our final Connect with Nearby Nature webinar in April will cover the mapping and signage templates. So you can join in for that. We'll talk about it in a bit more detail towards the end of the webinar. Okay, so to support you in the creation of a field guide for nature near your school or students' homes, the resource we've created includes a field guide template that can be used as inspiration or as a foundation for these actual field guides. So I'm now going to walk you through what the template includes by heading over to show you what the resource looks like. So if I scroll down, the first 3 pages are the guidance and tips for creating a field guide, which is a lot of what we're talking about in this webinar. So I won't go over that in too much detail. But then down to page number 4, this actually provides detailed guidance on how you might use the template. So I'll just enlarge this a bit so everyone can see. So the first section here is a specimen name. And here you can consider including different languages, English and French, perhaps also a local indigenous language or the scientific or Latin name. Observation dates is also a section here we've included. It might be useful or interesting to include details about seasonality and what times of year the specimen would be found in the field. There's also an images section where students can insert photos or sketches of the specimen. And this might also include indicators of size about the actual measurements of the objects for comparative scale. And we also have a digital version, which I'll show you in a second, where you could consider including directly including the photos or including multimedia like video or audio clips. And in the description section, we've included some suggestions such as including information about size, colors, distinctive features, consider classifying the specimen as a native or non-native species, and identifying where it originates from. Depending on the age or the grade level, you might take a different approach and focus on sensory descriptions like smell, touch, sound, and sight. The next is a narrative section, which might include personal stories about the organism or traditional uses of the plant or animal. If you're going this route, be sure to consult with Indigenous partners if you're bringing in traditional ecological knowledge. You could also take an approach through poetry, history, or other special content to fit your learning goals. And the second last box here is all about relationships. So that's where students can include details about the relationship of the specimen between this specimen and others. So for example, is the animal a predator or a prey to others? What nutrients does the plant need or provide to the ecosystem. And focusing on the relationships can really help students develop a systems perspective to better understand the specimen's role within the environment as a whole. And we also have an other section, which really could include whatever additional information might meet your learning goals. One suggestion here is to indicate the species at risk status. So now I'll just scroll down to show you the actual fillable template, which can be printed out for students to work on and potentially take directly into the field. So you have your area for the title and all of the sections that I just spoke about. And then, so I'll just go back to show you the digital version. So this is a version that students can fill out on the computer. So you can type into all of these fields. And in the images area, once this is downloaded as a PDF, images can actually be selected from the computer and added here as image files. So I think that's all I wanted to show you here. I'll just go back to our presentation. Okay. So next in the steps to creating this field guide, you'll want to decide or have your students decide what the final format will be. So now that I've showed you the field guide template, you might think that this is a good starting point for engaging in this outdoor observation. But there are lots of other ways that you might present it. So a few ideas. The hardcover booklet is obviously, as I mentioned, supported by the template, but you could have students design one of their own creation. The field guide could also take the form of a digital database or website, or a social media account even, a podcast or audio production, or even a video tour. And collecting materials, always an important part of heading outside, and especially for this field guide activity. So depending on the final format of the field guide, you and your students might need the following materials. So the field guide template, as we've talked about, a notebook, writing tools, measuring tools, drawing supplies, maybe an internet connected GPS enabled device or a paper base map. This might be relevant if you plan to connect your field guide to a map making activity later on, so that when students are out in the field, they can start indicating where they've seen different specimens, and that will help them create maps at a later point. A camera is always a great resource that if you have a shared classroom camera, that might be a good material to take out with you. And research supports. So that might be contacting your local conservation authority for recommendations of published field guides, or seeking leadership from Indigenous knowledge keepers to learn about traditional ecological knowledge. And it's also a great idea to look for hard copy versions of field guides for your region as references and inspiration. And then a last note on materials, that if you are going outside, do make sure that everyone has weather appropriate clothing, a bag to carry supplies, and water to stay hydrated. And another reminder about that educator booklet that we talked about during the last webinar, it has even more tips to ensure that your outdoor adventures are comfortable and accessible. Okay, so once you've done that prep work and kind of decided what direction the field guide is going to take, you can get outside and start exploring. A few other considerations to keep in mind here include safety protocols for your class. So being sure to communicate spatial boundaries, emergency response plans, and learning expectations so that students know how to respond in unexpected situations. Students could also bring a draft, as I mentioned before, of the field guide template outside, where they could record all the details without worrying about presentation yet. Also encourage students to note as many details as possible. So this will allow them to properly identify the observation later, because you don't always know, what plant species or animal even you might encounter, so they can do some research when they get back to the classroom. This is where you might consider taking photos, videos, or audio recordings as well. And collecting field observations may be a one-time activity, or it could span several sessions. You might consider collecting observations throughout the school year to experience environmental changes through the seasons. And as you all may know, more time outside is going to yield more observations and a richer experience for the students. Okay, so once you've come back inside, or you've come back after your multiple sessions outside, collected the details in written notes, illustrations, photographs, or videos. Students can conduct research to identify their observations. So as mentioned, they could use the internet, existing field guides, species identification apps, local experts, and personal experience to complete their research. They can, at this point, translate draft notes into a polished field guide. And you could even consider incorporating a peer review process so that other students can review and exchange work to share learning with each other. And students can collaborate to organize their entries into a whole field guide of their outdoor space. And this organization could be based on categories such as traditional uses of the plant, visual characteristics like color or habitat preferences. And here's where, it's a fun activity for students to figure out how they want to organize. So we'd really recommend looking at existing field guides for ideas. And students can collaborate as a whole to name the field guide. If every student does one entry, it can kind of come together in one class field guide. And then sharing your learning. So this is something we're recommending with all of these Nearby Nature materials that might get created through these resources. So share them with the school and broader community. This provides great student leadership opportunities, creates connections, and fosters a greater sense of ecological awareness and respect for local environments, even in areas that might not traditionally be considered nature. And as mentioned a few times now, the educator booklet does have even more ideas about how students can share their Connect with Nearby Nature projects. Okay, so before kind of wrapping up and talking about and getting to some questions and conversation, as I mentioned, we do have one more webinar in this series, creating maps and signage. And as I'm chatting here, Erin, our programs and data assistant, is adding the registration link to the chat. So you can click on that and sign up for our next webinar now. It'd be great to have you there. And also, this is a little later on in the year, so we can spend some more time talking about best practices and what you've experienced with these resources and with your students throughout the year. Part of this webinar at the end is going to be a mini focus group. So we'll spend just a little bit of time getting some feedback on your experience this year, engaging in Nearby Nature and using these resources to support your work. Okay, so as a final reminder, here's how you can access the Connect with Nearby Nature action and associated resources. Make sure you've created a plan in the EcoSchools certification application. And remember that registering your school and creating a plan is not an obligation to certify. It simply gives you access to all of the great resources that can support your environmental learning and action. And then once you've created your plan, add the Connect with Nearby Nature action to it. And then you'll be able to access this field guide instructions, as well as all the other Connect with Nearby Nature resources. And then you can start getting outside, which is, I'm sure, where many of us would like to be more of the time. Remember that you can contact us with questions, programs@ecoschools.ca. If you have any questions about this throughout the winter and spring. And also do connect with us on social media. We do have a pretty active Twitter channel. So if you aren't already following us, follow us there or on Facebook or Instagram, and we will follow you back. And with that, that brings us to the end here. Thanks for joining today for this short little webinar. I just also want to take a moment to recognize that this Connect with Nearby Nature project was created with the support from the TD Friends of the Environment Foundation. So with that, we will get to our questions. I see there's some things happening in the chat here, so I can take a look at those, but I'm also open to folks just turning off mute and asking their questions directly. So thanks for those of you who entered or shared the territory that you're joining from today. And we do have a question from Jennifer asking if we have any suggestions for great websites to help students research and identify the plants and animals they found outside. So great question. Off the top of my head, I don't have the exact websites, but we do have a lot of resources in that Connect with Nearby Nature educator booklet I mentioned. So there's a page, I think it's the last page on the resource that has a great list of additional resources. And Sierra from our team has just shared one great example, which is canplant.ca. So thanks for sharing that, Sierra. And yeah, any other questions folks have, or you want to ask any of the other educators who've joined today? At our last webinar, we had some nice conversation amongst folks at the end, kind of sharing some ideas about what how you'd been engaging with students this year so far, and yeah, just tips are always helpful, and best practices.
Hi, everyone. I'm in Halton here in Milton. And at the beginning of the year, last year, we got STEM kits for outdoor education. I don't know if any other schools got them, but the guidebooks that were included in those, they were these laminated fold out. And my kindies, like I've been taking 8 different kindy classes out since September, and they just love them. They could actually go and find a leaf and match it to the leaves in those guides. So if anyone else got those at those school, I know they were really helpful. They had the animals, they had the plants, and there were insects. So they were just, like I said, it's one fold out laminated. It's really sturdy. It survived my kindies and outside in the fall. So really good product.
Great, thanks for sharing. If you have the name of that resource, that might be helpful for folks on the call. So sounds great. So Heather is just saying, if you're in Halton, the University of Guelph makes laminated placemats that are $7 each, and they're great. Sierra's just recommending a few other great citizen science apps that we highly recommend. So that includes iNaturalist, Seek, LeafSnap, and EDD Maps, Ontario. Awesome. Bugs and Slugs. I think
It's a pocket naturalist guide, folding pocket guide to familiar North American invertebrates. And then the Pocket Naturalist Ontario Wildlife.